comments. We are going to start with the first comment of Dr. Kamel Sayed, who is a renowned political science professor at the Cairo University, in the American University in Cairo, and also in California and Harvard. He has assumed a lot of posts and has conducted many valuable studies in different fields, including human rights, civil society. So it is a pleasure to have him here amongst us. Thank you, Dr. Amar and Dr. Abla, for this invite. It has been a pleasure to listen to what Dr. Osman offered, and he is a very dear friend of mine. I'm going to start off with the importance of social justice globally, and I remember that 2 years ago Thomas Piketty issued his important book on capital in the 20th century. That book was well received, and the issues of wealth and income and the gap between them are still on the increase. Of course, the latest development has led to the increasing gulf between the poor and the rich. What happens in Eastern Europe? The OECD indicated that there is an increase of the gap between the poor and the rich, but wondered, is it good for development or not? One of the points of view that the gap is this. In order to have capitalism, you must have huge capitalists, which is one of the necessities from moving from communism to capitalism. So since we are on this quick shift to capitalism, we started to have this the question of social justice: is it good for Egypt or not? The same OECD report indicated that social justice is good for development, and even during these transitional times, it's good for development as well, because it also has its impact on purchasing capacity. I'm not comparing it to the past, but there are a lot of precursors that point out that social justice is one of the flagrant problems in Egypt, but it is normal in these transitional times, since we are on our en route to capitalism. The other point has to do with the dimension of social justice. Dr. Megid indicated 5 dimensions, but there are 2 that I would like to shed specific light. First one, the classist dimension. When we measure social justice, we measure the people, gender, geographical, but the class dimension is very important because it translates the number including the capitalists, the middle class, the workers, the peasants, and with this measurement, are the conditions for workers going to be better or not? And there are some countries that have ethnic multiplicity. In Lebanon and Iraq, for example. So what are the proportionate distribution of wealth amongst the Kurds, Shias, Sunnis? So the class aspect is very important, but we have to understand the kind of class that the country is being divided into. And going back to what Dr. Magid said, then I believe that he's going to allow me to differ when we talk about political will, because social justice, first of all, I have proof that social justice, the divorce rate in Egypt, for example, is the highest in the world, and and also the incremental tax. We have been talking about the incremental tax for years, and and this it has been implemented in Egypt only shyly when it was imposed based on the terms and conditions of the World Bank and the IMF. But I highly doubt that there are certain there is a serious shift towards social justice, and we're, we're talking about the redistribution of wealth. We're talking about correctional measures. If we're talking about the political will, we must understand what social justice means, and I think that concept is generic and it's very generic. When talking about the measurement of social justice, or the definition of social justice, Dr. Megan said that the purpose of empowerment or the availability of equal opportunities, it is true. However, we should understand that we're talking about equal opportunities when we are all on equal footings. So it's as if as if we're in a race. And so we start at the starting line. We should be on equal footing, but this does not happen. You have people who are ill. We have able-bodied people. We have the strong and weak. When we talk about the availability of equal opportunities, we have to take into consideration people with disabilities as well, which has been mirrored in the studies conducted by Dr. Assaad when he found that the education, the opportunities or the access to education amongst the poor and the rich is 1 to 7. Despite the fact that there are equal opportunities. However, these equal opportunities do not lead to wealth, because those who are born within poor families cannot achieve the same academic levels as those who are born in rich families. And of course, academic achievement is linked with the family background. So there must be correctional measures to be put in place to help the people who are not able to join the race. Dr. Megan also mentioned 3 stages of justice: the distributional, correctional, and the full equality. But the question is how to move or transition from one to another, from the correctional justice to the distributional justice to full equality. This is closely tied to the political ability. So there are different pathways. The first one is the state. The state does not include any distributional measures, and also those who make the most, or those who have the political ability, are not going to tolerate these measures. So this is governed not only by the economic situation, but also by the political situation. So the people the political aspect in social justice is very important, and this inequality cannot be sustained without a political and underpinning political will. Also, the dimensions of social measurement of social justice. He split it into the human capital and the social capital. The human capital indicators are the same as the human development index, but I would like in this respect to say that the European Human Development Report moved away from the global human development, and it included the fulfillment of the political freedom and the fulfillment of the fundamental needs. Because the higher the human development, the higher the fulfillment of the fundamental needs, and also he attached significance to the political freedom, and if you look at the Human Development Index, you find that the Gulf countries rank high, despite the fact that there is no political expression in these countries. That's why the European Human Development Index restructured the whole report and the whole concept. The other indicator that has to do with the social capital. Most of the indicators of these dimensions are called the psychological capital, the sense of trust or confidence, is security. It is basically focused on this concept. However, the most common trend goes to the engagement or involvement with the political parties. And one of the American politicians are scientists who lived in Germany found out that the ability of peoples to meet is one of the indicators of social capital, because this is what gives them the empowerment. So Dr. Megan included 5 sub-indicators. Participation is being diluted when it is mixed with other indicators. The importance of these indicators is the availability of social capital, which will empower people to change the status quo. We're talking here about a political empowerment in different classes in the different and the universities. Those people that are impacted by the current state of the distribution of wealth, when these people get to meet in associations, in unions, in political parties, this is the change of situation, of change of reality. We're talking here about the freedom of association and assembly, and you know that there is a crackdown on unions, on political parties, on Dr. Megid still insists that there is political will. And I think that it is pretty useful to abide by the definition that is closely tied with the concept of social capital. And in conclusion, I believe that the total, the result is really scary because you said that the range is 1 to 10, and we stand at 2, or we didn't even reach 3. This is scary. This is terrifying. The end result is terrifying, but in this case there is a problem, because the other matter that I wanted to raise is that uh, there are polls conducted in Egypt. Did you ask people, do you feel that the conditions in Egypt are unjust? What are the manifestations of injustice? Because the awareness of this topic is of paramount importance, because the question should be innovatively put. Uh, but in the Arab mindset, the social justice is closely tied to the socioeconomic conditions, but linking it with the wealth and the distribution of wealth, it is not that clear in the Arab mindset, and in this in and of itself is very important. Perhaps uh, is social justice may not be very important to people, rather the fulfillment of fundamental needs could be even more important. I would like really enjoy the ECES presentation, and that put forward by Dr. Megan. This is a very good chance to discuss the issue.
Thank you, Professor Mostafa Kamel Said, for his presentation. Even though the Egypt experience in wealth distribution was not that successful, and maybe we could study social justice from equal opportunities perspective, that would be the shortest pathway forward. And Dr. Hania Sholkamy would like to comment. She has a long expertise in social protection matters, and she decided many monetary policies programs. She worked as advisor for the Minister of Social Solidarity, and she's a researcher in the Social Studies unit at AUC. She's a former visiting professor in the American University in Beirut and in other universities. She's done a lot. And she's a PhD holder from the Faculty of Political Science, University of London. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank the center and Dr. Megit for giving me the opportunity to comment on such an insightful paper. And as you know, I don't work on the technical matters relevant to the quality of measurements, but I'd like to pose 5 questions. I address Dr. Megid, or we can say that this would be considered food for thought, as this indicator is still a work in progress. So we have 5 fields to study to be able to achieve the indicator at its best. First, I have a problem when it comes to the definition of the social justice. What is the model we follow? How can we measure social justice? Any model adopts a main concept. The paper usually begins with the European social justice indicator. It's based on the European model after the Second World War, universal, based on the concept of universal employment. So those who do not work should get a kind of protection or assistance or subsidy from other institution. The model is based on open borders. Those who fought with the Allies have a right to work and live in Europe. So this indicator refers to the immigrants. So this is contextualized in its own time and space. This is based on the European citizenship model. They fought for democracy. they fought for gender equality, and I don't say that this model is not applicable here in Egypt, but this is a theoretical model based on certain theoretical assumptions to be measured. Here, I'm not quite sure what is the Egyptian model. A model based on Egyptian constitutions, for example, and these constitutions are to some extent theoretical and not enforced through a community participatory dialogue. So the measurements, as Dr. Megid said, how can you measure a jellyfish, or how can you measure such an elusive concept without a solid model to be followed? The second question, do the indicators reflect the features of such a model? What are the priorities? What are the bases upon which the model is built? Dr. Meg said that the full equality is required, but what are the mechanisms? The mechanisms would be based on competency, on merits, on the quality of public services, because this might be one approach. Or are we speaking here of the equal wealth distribution? Do we have like certain resources, certain services distributed in a certain manner? Or are we referring here to the new liberal model, access to opportunities and who get these opportunities? Or are we referring to the procedural justice? We have a problem in procedural justice, in recourse to justice, in justice tools or mechanisms. Here I'm referring to the rule of law, to the freedom of opinion and conscience, to the health and service sectors, to the per capita income of the resources, whether water or air. So the indicators are there, but are we looking at the per capita income or to access to these resources? Is the indicator in place reflective enough? Here I'm posing a question. Are these indicators based on a certain model? Like a sense of justice is more important than getting access to justice? Or feeling of security or safety is better than looking at the crime rates, for example, or people having access to procedural justice at courts? How can we measure the sense of? Is it easier to measure than drafting certain indicators comprising of the data available that's still to be formed? Maybe the sense is not as important as measuring education or access to education. Also, the sense of safety was a bit confusing to me. Why don't we have sub indicators comprising social protection, health insurance, but also the quality of social insurance, savings? Savings would help people feel safe or secure when it comes to education. School to work transition is really important. Who gets job opportunities after they finalize or they finish their education? So we need to reconsider this indicator. What is the concept of social justice in this model? Of course, it's the gap approach, but not each gap can be measured the same way, because the problems are different. The intergenerational gap or the age gap, for example, maybe I have less access because of my age, but when it comes to access to information and knowledge, this is not very important. But for the gender gap, the gender gap would translate differently in each indicator. So I propose that we pose the question: is the social justice a possibility or capability or a situation? Is it a part of freedom, as Amartya Sen, the famous economist, discussed it? Is it a kind of ability or freedom from obstacles hindering my access? And the data in this regard might be available and might be measurable. But we need to place this model in a certain framework. Also, the last question or the last point, the model should differentiate between the five dimensions, and the ECES work in this regard with the additions could differentiate this. We have distribution equality, having a clear definition, and there is also equal access or equal accessibility, meaning that whatever is available, or the opportunity and the access to education is amplified. How much do we spend on education or access to education, and would that be reflected on the quality of education? And this is totally unfair. If we have something that I spend a lot of money on, but I cannot get access to, or I cannot get the desired goal. Also, we should add something on mobility or transportation. There are three different points: environmental justice, and here the center added something on environmental justice, and this is a complicated indicator. My per capita income from water would definitely differ based if I'm a citizen or I'm a farmer. And we should take into consideration the current situation and the future situation, taking into consideration my profession, my social and economic conditions. Also, the quality environmental income should be taken into consideration. Intergenerational equality should be taken into consideration when it comes to debt servicing or public debt, because Lagarde, the IMF director, said it many times. It's a nightmare, as it has dire consequences on future development. Also, the environmental debt is important. The public environmental debt, we are borrowing from the future through our consumption. The last option should be access to procedural justice. And this does not mean the tax having a fair tax system, but also I'm referring to procedures in courts, in police stations, in administrative measures, in the administrative part of the justice system, in the freedom of or data availability. This are the basis of the justice as a concept, as an enabling factor to exploit the available resources. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you so much, Dr. Hania, for your suggestions. And thank you, Dr. Mostafa, for your comments and suggestions as well. We have so much work to do. And now we will give the floor to Dr. Ragui Assaad, a visiting professor at the Economy Department of the American University in Egypt, and a public policy professor in the Minnesota University. And he assumed many posts, regional director for the population council in Cairo and in Egypt. His research interests are on markets in the Arab world. He authored many books, and he is a PhD holder from Cornell University, and he got his master's from mechanical engineering from Stanford University. Thank you so much, Dr. Abla, and I'd also like to thank the Center for the kind investigation, so the kind invitation to discuss this important indicator. The paper I received is a bit different from the presentation Dr. Magid gave, so I will refer more to the measurement of this indicator as this is the focus, and then I'll have some English slides, but I'll speak in Arabic. There is a huge this is really important to have an indicator for measuring social justice, because this will make us focus on social justice as an end or an objective for public policies, allowing us to measure the progress we make. Also, we will start a community dialogue on the concept of social justice, components of social justice, and measurement of social justice. And this has already started because the definition of social justice is a bit problematic and multifaceted. So, I wonder if we can compare over time the same indicator in a certain country, for example, and now we are developing an indicator for Egypt. But it's also important to go for over countries comparison. So we usually are ranked really low in international comparisons, and it's good to have an idea on how these comparisons are conducted. So in addition to the Egyptian indicator, we should have a look at the international comparisons. I should tackle the rationale or the theory behind this indicator. As Dr. Megid said, we focus on two aspects: the human capital and the cultural and social capital. And this comes from the Human Development Report in Egypt, to which Dr. Megid is a party. Of course, we will differ a lot on the different aspects or different dimensions to be measured, and the theoretical framework is really important, as Dr. Hania said. Of course, we can add certain dimensions to this model. For example, the economic dimension is not represented enough. We have economic gap between the highest quintile and the lowest quintile. So I want to know the income of the highest quintile compared to the lowest quintile. I cannot find this anywhere in the indicator. Is the ratio 7 to 1 or 15 to 1, whether when it comes to income or consumption. So the economic dimension is not well represented. We focused more on human capital, but not on the income itself. So income and living conditions are really important when it comes to highest quintile and lowest quintile, in addition to the gender gap and geographical gap. Also, there is a very important element: access to basic services, water, and just as Ms. Hoda said, sanitation or natural access to natural gas, and etc. And housing is not represented in the indicator, the differences in housing. So these are some of the elements to be included. As we said, the weights play out differently. If we assign different weights to different dimensions, the result will dramatically change. So we should start a community dialogue on the weights for each dimension. like sense of safety or security will be given the same weight as the income gap, for example? In my own point of view, all the elements should be objectives of the social policy. I should be able to influence this element through certain social policies. So, for example, does the social policy target or encourage people to participate or to enroll in medicine and engineering schools? But I think this is really specific. Maybe some people don't want to be doctors or engineers. So this might not affect what people want. Can or should I use social media? No, the point is having access to the internet. The use of social media is not an element or a dimension indicating justice. Do I have to read the newspaper? Maybe I prefer to read newspapers online. Why do I have to watch TV or read newspapers? So this is a matter of personal preference, choosing a certain channel over the other. So the point is accessibility. As for reading, some people like reading, others don't, or I prefer to watch TV or go to the theater. So again, this is a matter of personal preference over something over the other. So what is really important is to give people the opportunity or to give people access to, and I will use Amartya Sen model development as freedom. I'm giving people the opportunity, and people themselves choose whether they do this or they use this or don't. But I cannot measure this as a part of the justice or injustice or inequality. So, as for some subjective measures, like a perception of, for example, trust in others or satisfaction with life, in most of the indicators, this will be reflected or reversed. The vulnerable or the deprived groups trust more others or trust more institutions, because I know that poor people will say this is God's destiny, this is what God fated for me, I think what I got is enough. So satisfaction is linked to what I expect, what I'm waiting for, and the poorer you are, the fewer expectations, and the vice versa. So I think this is problematic, the subjective measures, because the deprived groups will have less expectations, of course. So what is the theoretical framework I prefer? I prefer Amartya Sen framework, to which Dr. Hania referred, and this is comprised of 5 elements. Of course, not the 5 elements apply to the social justice, but much of them. And I, we should focus on the second, third, and fourth, but also the first element is important, to which Dr. Mostafa talked. Also, the transparency guarantees or the procedure justice Dr. Hania referred to. Do the institutions allow people to have access to justice? So the 5 elements are really important, and the main challenge lies on measuring these elements or components. So I'll speak for some time uh, about some of these are available. As for the economic dimension, I think income or expenditure are not there as a horizontal element. This shouldn't be represented vertically between the highest quintile and lowest quintile. Access to employment is there, And here we are not talking about formal and informal employment, but should be a regular or full timer employment or not. There is a problem in Egypt when it comes to seasonal work, and they are subject to poverty and they are really vulnerable. As for the social opportunity, of course, health outcomes are important and they are well covered in the current indicator. As for access to education, in this model, we focused more on pre schooling and university education because, of course, there is a wider gap. But we should tackle secondary education, and the quality of primary education is really important and should be measured. We know that there is a lack of data on this, but the quality of primary education, class density, student or teachers to students ratio, all these sub indicators should be taken into consideration. Access, of course, to basic services, as I said. There's a different element, participation in the life of community. This is really important. Connectivity, can people connect to the internet? I'm not talking about the usage, I'm talking about access to the internet. Also participation, as Dr. Mostafa said, participation is really important, and this is underestimated within the model, and this can be included in the subjective indicators as a perception of safety or sense of safety. Of course, safety is really important, and I agree with Dr. Hania. I need to measure safety and not sense of safety. I need to measure social safety or social security through subsidies, pensions, and etc. And this is already included in the indicator. But uh, uh, takaful and karama cash allowance is really important because this is part of the social solidarity programs, so we shouldn't focus on the regular pensions people get. What is the takeaway message? Most of the subjective indicators are problematic, and most of these indicators are reversed compared to what is expected. All the indicators, depending on people's choice and not or preference and not accessibility, are problematic. So the way people use the media, the way people consume media, and I referred to these matters before. Let us tackle the five gaps. These are really important. It's important to measure the inequality dimensions, whether vertically, the gap between different classes or different income brackets, and we should also measure this horizontally through the differences in gender or geographical elements. These are really important, but we shouldn't confuse the measurements between the difference between the poor and the rich and the identification of the gap. This should be done vertically and horizontally. Some indicators might be on the family level, in household level, income, for example, level, or the household level, but we don't have enough data, for example, on gender consumption or the difference in gender consumption. As for the geographic inequality dimension, which is very relevant, we should focus on a certain region or the most affluent region and compare it to the most deprived region. Maybe we can compare Upper Egypt to urban areas in Egypt. So we shouldn't compare Upper Egypt to Lower Egypt. We should compare the richest region to the poorest region. I'm not really convinced with the idea that the generational inequality is well or properly measured, because it's the narrowest gap, and it's not as important as the other gaps. So intergenerational gap is important, and there is an attempt to measure this through environmental dimension, but I don't know how do we use certain overall indicators to measure this. I want to know more about this gap. The data sources are variable, are different, but some of the resources are not periodical and will not enable us to publish this on an annual basis. So maybe we can use the labor force survey, which is really rich and issued every quarter, and this was not used at all in the drafting of these indicators, though it contains many important indicators on employment or education. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ragui. Exactly, this is what we wanted to listen to. We have invited you to come here and raise all of the problematic areas uh, so that we can together develop this indicator. I believe there are multiple points such as the accessibility and different points